Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fireside Chicago, where we host fireside chats with prominent leaders from Chicago's business community, live on Zoom with Q&A every Tuesday and Thursday at 11:30 a.m. Central Standard Time. I'm your host, Tim Shum. I'm also the founder and president of Lucas James Talent Partners here in town, here in Chicago. We have a great show today. We have Bobby Achettu that's going to be live with us. We're going to get to Bobby in a second. If you haven't already, definitely check out Fireside Chicago's LinkedIn page. Soon, let's call it 2 weeks, we will be all over where you can get podcasts. So if you get podcasts from Spotify or Apple, you can get the audio from all of our shows there. So make sure that you subscribe there. You can also check out the Lucas James Talent website, lucasjamestalent.com. /Fireside Chicago, and subscribe to make sure you get access to future shows. So today we have Bobby Achettu. Bobby is the founder and CEO of Accelerated Growth. Bobby is a former consultant and private equity principal turned entrepreneur. Accelerated Growth partners with founders, boards, investors of growth-minded organizations to provide outsourced finance, strategic, and operation services to accelerate their growth. Bobby is also a senior member of the Entrepreneurs Organization Chicago chapter and is also adjunct faculty at Northwestern University. Bobby and I go way back. I think we met maybe 4 years ago. A lot of other folks know my story. I spent my time in corporate America and left to start my own company. This is dating back to January of 2016. I didn't know anybody. I didn't know what entrepreneurship was like. I was seeking other folks that had done this before, maybe some mentors, and Bobby and I had met maybe one of my first meetings. So I've always admired Bobby. He's full of insights and experiences, and he's very, very well known in Chicago. So with that said, Bobby, welcome to the show, man. Nice seeing you again.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's funny, when we first met years ago, I never really thought about it, but you are perfect for this webinar, podcast, the voice, you've got it all.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. You know, I've had my head down for so long trying to, grow Lucas James Talent Partners, and COVID has provided an opportunity to get this going. It's been fun. But yeah, happy to have you join us. So for the folks that haven't met you, aren't familiar with Accelerated Growth, let's just start with a little background on Bobby and then how you started Accelerated Growth. I'll pass the mic to you.
Absolutely, Tim. And actually our stories are very similar. So ex-corporate guy, passion for entrepreneurship, passion for the space, started the company a little over 10 years ago. And in fact, when I jumped into the entrepreneurial world, I didn't really know too much about it. I knew that I really enjoyed what I was doing. So finance, operations, technology. And really the first 3 years, it was me and a couple independent contractors. I didn't have a clearly defined vision, mission statement, any of those things. I was just really brute forcing it those first few years. It was the last 7 years or so that we've been scaling as an organization. So now we're at about 65 people in total. We have 2 offices, one in Chicago, another in Bangalore. Roughly about 50 people here in Chicago, and the remainder in our Bangalore office that we started a little over a year ago. The focus of our firm is really around infrastructure build in the areas of finance, operations, and technology. So in the last 10 years, we've worked with over 300 companies, from highly funded startups in the early stages to the venture groups of Fortune 500 companies. So we've had an opportunity to see a vast array, been part of some really interesting growth stories here in Chicago, some very successful exits, and it's been a ton of fun all along the way.
So you started this in 2009, which, if I remember correctly, there was a pretty steep economic downturn. Yeah. I'm pretty sure my history serves me correctly. What prompted you to start a business? And then second part of that is, why 2009?
Absolutely, yeah. So I'm going to take one step before that. So I was at PricewaterhouseCoopers in their consulting practice. So really loved the work, but wanted to do something of more impact, more tangible. And so I joined a private equity firm. That was really my first exposure to the entrepreneurial world. And I just fell in love with the space immediately. The ability to, build those strong relationships, to see a vision and to see it through and execute it. And while I was at the PE firm, what I saw is the way we describe it now. And I mentioned earlier how I started my company with brute force. That's the traditional way the founders start their organizations. So not a lot of structure and process. They have a good product. They're willing to put in the time, 100-hour work weeks. They have a strong leadership team, and they build. But in the second stage of growth, as we define it, out of that startup stage, you need structure and process in every functional area of the business. And yes, it was the middle of, at the time, a significant downturn. But I was really fortunate in that our first client was in hyper growth mode. So this was a scenario where in the middle of this downturn, our client was growing 40, 50, 70% a year. And so that first client, in fact, they're still a client of ours. When we started with them, there were 40 or 50 people. They now have over 1,000 people. So I was very fortunate those early days to be in an organization that was in that growth mode. I learned a ton. That was really my primary client for about 3 years before I started picking up other clients.
How did your experience at PwC and probably especially that private equity firm either, educate you and kind of, lower that barrier for you to start a business? Like, hey, I know these individuals are doing it. Maybe I could do it too. What benefits did your previous experience give you, at least those first couple of years?
Absolutely. And the way I describe it, so certainly there was technical skills that I learned, but more than anything else, both those environments were tremendous pressure cookers in the sense, just the amount of exposure that you got, the high levels of stress, and just very candidly, the 100-hour work weeks. What that did was created an environment where I was used to consistent levels of intensity. And there's probably no other way to prepare you for the entrepreneurial space than to be in that type of environment. The other thing it did, though, is it made me realize that if I'm going to put this time, energy, and effort into something, it's never been about the money for me. It's been about the vision of what I'm trying to accomplish. So the challenge I had at PwC and the private equity firm, both organizations I have tremendous respect for and still have wonderful colleagues at, the challenge I had there was the vision and mission weren't really clearly defined. At PwC, again, as much as I love that organization, it was really about utilization and billable hours. And at the PE firm, it was on return on invested capital. And the reality is for organizations like that, that's a very traditional approach. There's nothing wrong with that. But the combination of that intense environment, the desire to do something that I was extremely passionate about, and the desire to find a vision of my own is really what set me on my journey to start my company.
I tell you, I like to make calculated risks myself, but I'm also a risk taker. So, I made the plunge and I'm starting a business, but if I think about how many books that I read, podcasts that I listened to, conversations that I've had, Google searching, hey, what do you do in this scenario? How do you get started? What's the checklist? Coupled with my corporate background, which was, human capital solutions, and I was a salesperson and a sales leader.
Sure. There's
a lot of stuff. There's so many variables to starting a business that you need to know about and do well that I guess I'm not surprised of the rate of failure of entrepreneurs. And I mean, speaking for me, it's like, okay, like I know sales because I've done that before. And because I've done that before, I have a little confidence there. But I mean, I didn't do any marketing in my career. Finance, which you and I talk about all the time. Hey, when do I start paying myself? What does a credit line do? Why would I get investors and give up equity? What are other examples of people doing that? Operationally, how do you set up a structure? What's a scalable model? You really have to do a ton of research or find partners, like yourself or mentors or investors that know what they're doing. And I'm living it now. I'm 2 years into a business and my head's spinning. There's so many different variables that you have to hit on. Maybe speak to that in terms of maybe your experience or some of the stuff that AG is supporting clients with.
Absolutely. I'll speak first to my personal experience. It's interesting because I was extremely fortunate in that, though I didn't know much about the entrepreneurial space, that first client, I reported into the chairman of the board, who was a former president of a Fortune 500 company. So just tremendous experience, tremendous knowledge. He essentially became my mentor. And between that guidance, along with just being in a hyper growth environment, I just learned so much about how to operate a company. Now, fast forward to where we're at today, I'll be the first to admit in the early stages of even our firm, there was very much a cobbler shoes type scenario going on where, we were executing our service line on for our clients, but not necessarily doing all the same things that we did as a service for our organization now. What I will say is that worked until we got to about 10 or 15 people. And that's, what I'll define as the early stages of our organization was, that first iteration of growth. Much past that for us, we wouldn't have been able to continue to scale without having a strong foundation in finance, operations, technology, those types of things. And so for all those reasons, I've learned personally as I've built my firm that I need to be able to create that structure and process within our organization. And it becomes that much more compelling when I talk to prospects and clients about the fact that they need to create that foundation as well.
I feel like, if I were to put myself in my own shoes, I don't know, when I started to think about, hey, maybe I could start my own business, like prior to that, I looked at companies as like institutions. Like McDonald's has been around for forever. Walmart's been around for forever. Big company thought processes. Like you have an accounting department, you have a call center and customer service, you have a sales organization, marketing department, puts all the TV commercials together. Your view is just like, this is how society is. Things are built already. And then you have a mom and pop, shop, maybe a retail store. And then you come to find it's like, no, like these things started with an idea, an individual, a group of individuals. There was a lot of peaks and valleys. There's probably a lot of challenges. There's probably a lot of stories where companies almost went under. And then some of the variables that we're talking about, like, you have to have a very, 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 very thought through financial model. You have to come up with a plan and stick to it. There's a ton of variables that leads to these successes that I feel like is almost underappreciated, especially at the early stage. And then I've come to find that, a 50-person company, 100-person company, 200-person company that aren't these huge conglomerates yet, they need outsourced support. They need variable advisors or mentors or services, because when I'm at 15 people, I don't want to be thinking about an accounting department right now. Like what do I do there? And I think that's where accelerated growth comes in, right? You do that for companies. So maybe talk through some examples of maybe some of the services that companies at that like early 10 to 100 stage need, and you provide them with.
Absolutely, yeah. And so, the frame of reference of outsourced accounting, right? That's the general space that we fit within. That being said, I'll walk through some of the ways that we're a little bit different than other traditional outsourced accounting shops. So if on one side of the spectrum, you have the concept of a full-time resource, and the other side, you have a fully outsourced function, we like to play right in between. And very similarly, if you think about a staffing organization and a consulting firm, we play right in between. So we have the benefits of both sides of that equation. So oftentimes when an organization tries to hire a resource internally, whether it's one person in a one-person department or 5 people in a department, oftentimes there isn't that structure and accountability in place to begin with, and it becomes very difficult to execute a function. So we have the ability to take best practices from working with hundreds of different organizations and implement. Also, we have the ability to scale up or down based on the growth needs of an organization. So we have many scenarios where we've been with clients for 5-6 years through exits to larger corporate entities, and we're still engaged with them because we may start on a transactional level, then move up to financial reporting, analysis, technology, and then now we may just be doing AP processing for them through our office in Bangor. So we have the ability to go full life cycle from essentially that first, second stage all the way through exit. So that traditionally an outsourced accounting firm, once you get to about 5 to 7 million in revenue, the next trigger is to hire a full-time resource. And a lot of organizations have a challenge with that because it's just difficult to do. That most founders, they may have expertise in finance, but it's not their priority. But yet at the same time, they're bankers, they're investors, they need some level of discipline within the organization and structure, not to mention even just the ability to be audited and to be able to get through an audit. And so that's where we can plug in and assist on setting that infrastructure and then executing go forward.
If there's any entrepreneurs that are attendees right now, or you're listening to this via podcast, I'll tell you, reach out to Bobby and his team. The biggest investment that I made for my business was my financial model. It's a 5-year model. It's a plan, and it has variables like, hey, what happens if I add a salesperson? What revenue does that salesperson bring? What if I hire a good salesperson? What if I hire a salesperson that starts, maybe struggles a little bit, and then exits the company, and I have to replace that person? What if my pricing changes? What if my costs change? What if I add a credit line? What if my AR is net 15 versus net 90? What if there's 50% net 90 versus net 15? I was shooting from the hip. I was running the business like I run my personal finances. Thank God I'm pretty frugal, and I didn't run the company into the ground before, I did that exercise, and then I had Nico from your team kind of look at it. You and I kind of looked at it a little bit, but man, now I can sleep at night with every decision that I made. And I think for me, that was step one. And that was a huge blind spot. And I know that there's a ton of entrepreneurs that are just like shooting from the hip, going off emotion, running blind, maybe doing okay because they're working 100-hour weeks and running themselves in the business. But what do you see out there? And maybe speak to it from the lens of the aspiring entrepreneur that maybe wants to get into this, and maybe some shortcomings that they could avoid.
Absolutely. So what you're talking about is really, in my world, the difference between accounting and finance. Accounting is historical, finance is forward-looking. So far too often, when people start an organization, start a company with their idea and their thoughts of scale, they'll build out the financial model and then immediately just go into the accounting. So they build out the future model, and then they start looking at the past. And they never come back and correlate the two, and then assess the metrics, change the levers within the business to continue on that growth. And so that's, probably one of the biggest mistakes that we see founders and early stage companies do, is that they'll build the model at the front end, but they won't necessarily execute on that model outside of when they're in the midst of a capital raise or whatever else it may be. So that foundational aspect of linking finance and accounting is absolutely critical at the early stages. And what happens very often is the focus in the early stages of an organization is, and the accounting group is typically risk mitigation. So making sure you pay your taxes, and that you're accounting for things in a way that your bank will be okay with. Outside of that, early stage finance and accounting functions traditionally don't do a lot of forward looking. They don't do a lot of assessment around benchmarking and those types of things. And so, that's probably one of the biggest recommendations that I would have for folks in the early stages is make sure that you're not just creating a model and then putting it into a drawer somewhere and not looking at it again. Make sure you're tracking toward it on a monthly basis. Make sure you're assessing that the model incorporates changes in the marketplace, changes in your staffing, and make sure you're really looking at that in a consistent manner.
You have to. It's crazy. We had a profitable first year, which was awesome. And then first year was like 6 months, and then we had a profitable full 2019. It didn't feel like it. The cash crunch week over week over week, we're kicking butt, but we got AR that's just like sitting out there waiting to, get paid. And some people are delayed there and things like that. And I was like, I thought I was doing well. I'm landing customers. Yeah. They're happy. They're continuing to buy services. And where's the money? I'm like reading Inc. magazine and Fast Company, those stories about Zuckerberg and Elon Musk. I'm like, what the hell is going on? You have to. And if it's like out of your realm, you have to outsource it. You have to have someone else put a model together. And you're right, you have to track it. What's your view? You come from the private equity world. I'm sure a lot of your companies raise capital. What's your view on, 100% bootstrapped, doing it the merry way, and the story 20 years from now, I bootstrapped it the entire time, versus raising a lot of cash and accelerating growth versus somewhere in the middle? What's your view on that?
So the answer there is, it really is obviously dependent on industry, dependent on the entrepreneur and the vision of the entrepreneur. But what I would say is generally speaking, as far as you can get with growth using bootstrapping, I would highly recommend that for multiple reasons. One is, I've seen far too often organizations that raise a bunch of capital, dilute the founding team, and then essentially go through that first round with their experimentation and by making mistakes and those types of things. We've got several scenarios like that where investors are not very forgiving in situations like that. So, building that initial phase of the organization, with your own working capital, I think creates a discipline that becomes, very beneficial down the line as you raise further rounds. Now, there's certain industries that is very difficult to do, or frankly near impossible. And so, at that point, you have no choice but to raise outside capital to, build products and things like that. But we always advocate for, as far as you can get by bootstrapping, you should really consider doing that. Make raising capital an option, and always build your business to sell. Always. That's what you should be focused on, is enterprise value. However, that doesn't mean that you actually have to raise capital or sell your business.
That's super interesting. Yeah, I mean, we're in similar circles, right? I'm talking to business owners all day, every day. The last podcast we did, that was what we were talking about. That's our sales process. But there's the entrepreneurs that 100% bootstrap it. You need cash. You could either go sell more services or product to get that cash. You could get an SBA loan. There's other ways to raise capital outside of like investors and giving up equity, or you could raise a ton of equity cash. And there's other sides of the spectrum. There's 100% bootstrap. And then I've talked to folks that have built careers on raising a ton of cash and only owning 15% of their own companies year one.
Right.
But they knew the model. They knew exactly what to do with the capital.
Yeah.
They have systems and processes and people that they can integrate and get on board. And they come up with a plan. Hey, we're going to do maybe a private equity transaction year 5. And that's the goal for the business, to your point, based on my industry and what I want to do. But I don't think the average layman that's like, hey, maybe I want to start a business one day, really understands that dynamic. And I've just picked it up over time.
Yeah, for sure. And what I would say is, certainly there are people that are successful using that approach, but it is not for the faint of heart. You better have had the experience doing that and gone through a couple wars to be ready for a scenario like that.
So, you started your business in 2009. You mentioned you had your first customer probably kept you busy, kind of coming out of the last recession. And then it's been bull market. GDP's been going up, growth story, access to capital, stock market's going up, confidence is going up. There's more businesses that are being started than ever, low unemployment, war for talent. So, entrepreneurs have been basically kind of going off the same variables and playbook for a long time since you've started the business. March 14th, schools close in Illinois that whole week. NBA shuts down, NCAA shuts down. It goes from lots of confidence and exuberance to fear and uncertainty, and depending on the industry, business closures.
Right.
Pocketbooks are tightening. That was a big shift. I can speak from experience. From your lens and your clients, what did you see your clients go through, and what were the different ways that entrepreneurs and CEOs were reacting to that experience?
Absolutely. So we are certainly in just very unusual times. There's no question. And for this part of the discussion, I'm going to set aside the health concerns and the pandemic and that side of it, and just focus on the business side. You're absolutely right. Prior to March 14th, we were absolutely in a run like most people had never seen in their careers. The way I described it to clients during that run is that if you're not in high growth, if not hyper growth mode, there is something wrong with either your business model or your leadership team. It's one of the two. And a lot of our clients were in that hyper growth mode. What we found is after March 14th, that's where the cracks in an organization got blown wide open. So if you were struggling in various capacities, even outside of just the sales funnel, operationally, that got exposed. The other thing that we saw, though, is that the organizations that were able to pivot quickly, and by pivot, I don't even mean launching new products, just get in front of their client base, have discussions, have conversations, and sometimes they may lead to new clients, to new service lines, all those types of things. But the organizations that were able to react quickly, I've seen have been successful. Now, we're very fortunate as we think about our organization in that we do quite a bit of work within food CPG. And so that space specifically has seen a tremendous amount of growth over the last several months, right? Consumers are stocking their pantries. They're being cautious. And frankly, those trends are going to continue over the next several years. A, because of the uncertainty around COVID, but B, because people will have this memory in their mind and they'll continue to stock their pantries, right? And so we've been fortunate in that regard. Certainly, we've had clients that have faced challenges. We've helped them manage through. But what I'm seeing is over the last several months, organizations are really starting to look at their industry and starting to think about how is the industry overall going to change. This isn't just a blimp for a few weeks or months. This is going to be something that changes industries for many, many years to come.
Man, it's if you're in retail, if you're a movie theater, I mean, airlines, there's so many industries that are just like, it's so unfortunate that it's not their fault.
Yeah.
We're open, in Chicago, we're open in other cities sort of, but for certain areas of the economy, those industries got absolutely smoked.
Absolutely.
And then, I have clients right now that just so happen to be, winners. We're doing a lot of, food manufacturing as well. And then everywhere in between. My experience just in my career, and I worked in like a high octane, high stress kind of environment. I learned over time to like never get too high, and like never get too low. Like just keep your head down Monday through Friday, do the right things, learn, and then periodically, quarterly, you'll pick your head up and you'll probably be doing the right things. Now that spectrum is just so huge, right? And you work with a lot of business owners. What are you seeing in terms of temperament, emotions, how they're leading their teams, who's triumphing and, who's struggling with this environment?
Absolutely. And so we talk a lot in the firm about the concept of wartime CEOs. And this is absolutely a scenario where you have to act like a wartime CEO. And what's interesting, what we've seen within our portfolio is first and foremost, that starts with culture. It starts with communication, transparency, and just, frankly, radical candor with your team around what's going on. We've seen companies that are hesitant to share information and tell their people how bad things are. That will always backfire every single time. And the reality is without the team, there's no way you can it doesn't matter what industry you're in, without your team, you can't get through this as a CEO. And so, I think that is probably the biggest thing that I've seen as far as with successful leaders in this type of environment is transparency within their organization. The other thing that I think has been pretty consistent with the CEOs in our portfolio that are extremely strong is really just humility. The reality is, so I started my career right before the dot-com bubble. And as you mentioned, started the firm, in 2009 during, one of the biggest economic crises in a long time. So I've been through similar situations like this where, it seems like the sky is falling. This is certainly worse than any of that, because the reality is this involves not just our businesses and our careers, but our families and our friends, and frankly, for some people, their lives, right, of those dear to them. And so this is a very different situation. And so for those leaders that acknowledge that this isn't something that they have an equation or playbook for, it's something that they're managing through and trying to do their best around, that they don't have the answers. That's traditionally something else that we see in successful CEOs as well.
I mean, COVID or recession, or no COVID or no recession, you see leaders a lot of the time. Let's just give some examples. Point the finger,
Sure.
displace blame, have their head in the sand with accounting or finances, or cash is king, making sure that there's cash. Hey, the cash has been in the bank account for the last 2 years. I haven't had to look at it. That frankly run companies into the ground, and we've seen it. And last time we talked, we shared some examples of that, and that's unfortunate. Some of the folks that maybe are struggling during this time, like what are some examples of how they're showing up, and then maybe using those examples as maybe learning lessons or education to other entrepreneurs in your portfolio. What have you seen?
So it's interesting. It's no different in the business world than in your personal life, right? If you avoid what's in front of you, if you avoid the things that are hard, typically what happens is the problem just gets worse. And so we've seen that quite a bit, unfortunately, specifically in the early stages of COVID, so call it the first few weeks and months, where, though the research was out there and the information was out there about the impact, there were many companies that they didn't want to pivot. They didn't want to change their approach. And what ended up happening is a few months later, they came back to bite them, right? So I think, first and foremost is just an understanding around what the problems are, whether it's cash flow, whether it's the wrong product mix, whether it's a change in the marketplace dynamics that will require an organization to pivot. I think understanding those issues and taking a step back. So, what I would say for sure is those 100-hour weeks are critical in environments like this. There's no question. I think probably everyone, especially in those first few months, had to put their heads down. But it's so critical to take a step back. And whether that's with your board, with your advisors, with your attorney, whoever, just somebody else that could provide that perspective that you may be missing.
I've benefited, I feel like, I know immensely from other like-minded people in Chicago that are maybe doing something different in a different industry, but are maybe 10 years my senior, 20 years my senior. I'm trying to pay it forward to the person that just started. You and I had a call recently where I'm like, hey man, what do I do here? And we were able to kind of share some vulnerable experiences that really, really helped me out, frankly. And I thank you for that. But just the Chicago entrepreneurial scene, I know you're involved in Entrepreneurs Organization. How has that community impacted your business, your life, and maybe just categorize it for folks that aren't in there day to day like you and I are?
Absolutely. And so I'll start with the Entrepreneurs Organization that you referenced. So I've been a member for a little over 5 years now. And so if you recall, started my company 10 years ago without any entrepreneurial experience, without a lot of contacts and connections or people to bounce issues and ideas off of. And when I joined EO Chicago a little over 5 years ago, that was really my first experience meeting and getting to know on a deep personal level other entrepreneurs. Certainly, I was working with entrepreneurs as clients, but it's a whole different scenario to really get in their heads in a personal side of things. And so the way EO is structured is like a lot of peer group organizations, there are forums of anywhere from 8 to 12 people. And you meet with your forum on a monthly basis and you discuss both business and personal topics around being an entrepreneur. And to me, that's been probably one of the most, not just business impact, but life-changing experiences as being part of that organization. Because for the first time, I realized there were people that had, the details might be different, but the way they were looking at the world was exactly the same. As far as vision and the desire to have an impact, all those different things, from the spectrum of business all the way to personal, right? So one of my biggest challenges is probably balancing work and life, which I'm a true believer in the philosophy of work-life integration versus work-life balance, right? And so all of these concepts really were seeds planted in me by the Entrepreneurs Organization. And then so I'll extrapolate that now into the Chicago entrepreneurial community. Started my firm 11 years ago. And at that point, the entrepreneurial community in Chicago was still in the early stages. It was just kind of getting going. And we know the names of the folks that really helped drive the growth of the entrepreneurial scene. And now today, even in this COVID environment where we can't meet in person, there are just so many resources. There are so many people that are willing to help. It's absolutely amazing. And certainly I've benefited from that over the years, whether it be from the folks that sit on my board to just people that I meet in the community that, to your point, you could have just deep conversations. When you talk to another entrepreneur, even if you're meeting them for the first time, their story, their struggles, that, when you talk about the early days, I joke that, for the first few years, I made less than what a first-year analyst makes right now. I talk about the times where payroll was tight and you wondered, I talk about the times that I didn't take payroll, right? And so all those storylines, there's a resonance. And the beautiful thing about Chicago now is there's so many people that have not only gone through that, but are willing to share their experience with others.
It's been so cool to see. I feel very fortunate that, there's a crew out there of like-minded individuals that have paid forward mentality. I'm just a little over 2 years in, so you've seen what I've been through. I could call dozens and dozens and dozens of people for a quick question to help me kind of navigate a situation or get my mind right. And it's so cool to see. Bobby, we're going to wrap up with one question from David Horbenko. David asks, Bobby, what are some of the challenges your clients are facing that might prevent them from reaching the next phase in their business cycle, whether it be startup phase to emerging growth or emerging growth to sustainable growth? What breaks? What are some landmines there?
Absolutely. Thanks, Dave, for the question, and good to hear your name. What I'd say is there's obviously a lot of different answers to that. If I was to consolidate into one, with a focus on one of my area of expertise, it's really infrastructure. So when you think about the different stages of organizations, and as you go from startup to that second stage, there's more people, more products, more processes, frankly, that have to be defined and optimized. Often what we see is in the hyper growth mode, you end up, some of those processes start to break, or at minimum they start to shake. And then at the flip side of it is, you're at a point where potentially you want to exit or take on additional capital. And a diligence firm comes in and looks at your organization, and they're able to assess all of those things and identify the issues. And then potentially your valuation gets discounted because of some of these challenges in infrastructure that you haven't addressed, right? And so, we've seen that in a lot of instances. I think the other thing that is critical is finding a way to maintain your culture as you scale. That's something we talk about every day within our organization. I'm proud to say our culture has gotten even stronger as we've gone from those early stages of 10 to 12 people up to now 65 with a couple different offices, right? And that's not easy to do, but we spend a lot of time focused on that. As we grow and scale, our client base changes, the types of organizations we work with changes, a mix of our staff as far as skill sets, technology, finance, all these other areas, that changes as well. But that vision and mission and those core values, those have to stay the same. And so that's a challenge though, because not all organizations are willing to invest in the mission, vision, and core values to make sure that there is continuity as you grow.
I heard someone said this before, every time you triple, and tripling is not easy, but it's easier at the early stage, going from 100,000 to 300,000 and 300,000 to almost 1 million. Every time you triple, stuff breaks.
Yeah.
And it could be structural, like you need another manager, you need another coordinator, you need to outsource something to accelerated growth. Otherwise it's going to fall through the cracks, and now you're spending time on paying taxes and blah, 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 blah. There's so many things. And I think that's why, again, listeners, if you haven't really like modeled out your business accounting and finance wise, reach out to Bobby and his team. Because I think like when you start thinking about those things and put it on paper and you pick your head up every quarter, it's easy to say like, oh, okay, maybe we need to get Salesforce implemented. Maybe we need to do this. Maybe we need to do this because we're going to have this many people in 2 years. We need to start thinking about that. So anywho, this was an awesome conversation. Attendees, thank you so much for joining. David, thanks for the question. Bobby, if folks wanted to reach out to you personally, how do they do that? And if they wanted to learn a little bit more about your company, Accelerated Growth, how would they do that? Where can they find you?
Absolutely. So we're at acceleratedgrowth.com. And certainly feel free to reach out to Tim and he can connect us if you want to find out more outside of the website. But Tim, I really appreciate being asked to speak with you here. I've really enjoyed the discussion and excited to be part of this.
Likewise. I'm sure we'll talk soon, Bobby. Take care.
Sounds good. Thank you.